In 1994, as a 20-year-old studying communication science, I went on a work experience trip to Mozambique on the southeast coast of Africa. At one point, I found myself talking to a 30-year-old agriculturist in the outskirts of Maputo about food aid. At the time, I considered the idea of an American surplus of maize being sent to Mozambique as a good thing. What my newfound friend told me quickly put a dent in my belief system. As a maize farmer in Mozambique, the influx of free crops from the US and other countries resulted in a dumping of prices and from an inability to sustain their farm. The impact of the aid program was hurting local food production and making it harder for this country to feed itself in the long run. In fact, the Food Peace Program has later been described as one of the most harmful programs of aid to third world countries. As such, it is mainly an aid program for American farmers, allowing them to dump their surplus crops in third world countries, while American taxpayers pay for the surplus, and the people in less developed countries bear the ultimate high cost of perpetual poverty. Almost 30 years later, I'm seeing the same patterns being repeated again in the tech and design world. The digital colonizers, often with an aura of good intent, intervene under the guise of goodwill, often with the stated goal of making the world a better place. Intent can be benevolent and short-term outcomes often appear beneficial, but the many positive effects often create smokescreens that keep us from seeing the negative ones. In tech, these smokescreens are starting to clear. Today, there are many algorithms and machine learning systems designed to filter people for job approval. In this example, the social media accounts of babysitters are scanned to set a risk score based on occurrences of phrases related to bullying, harassment, disrespectful attitude, explicit content, and drug abuse. Not only is this AI screening error-prone, based on broken assumptions and privacy invading, it's a clear example of a growing power imbalance between employers and job seekers. And low-wage workers don't get to opt out. Homosexuality is still illegal in 70 countries. Sentencing can often lead to several years in prison. In a handful of countries, the death penalty is used. That's one reason to be concerned when dating apps display distance to other online users, something that many surely forget to turn off when traveling. But at least they only display distance, you may be thinking. They do not show direction. However, the only thing required to pinpoint an almost exact location of a person is manual triangulation. Stand in 3 different places and make a circle around each place with the given distance as the radius. Where these 3 circles intersect is where you will find the anonymous individual. This triangulation can be done by a person who stands in 3 different places, or of course even faster by 3 people carrying baseball bats who are working together. Apps designed to improve people's lives are exposing their own target groups to danger. And the people at risk have often not been informed about these risks in a satisfactory way. There are now, for example, reports coming out on police in Egypt using dating apps to entrap suspected homosexual men. Last year, Aaron White shared this story in a blog post. Late one night, a few years ago, a panicked professor emailed me. My transgender student's legal name is showing on our online discussion board. How can I keep him from being outed to his classmates? Short story, she wrote, we couldn't. The professor created an offline workaround with the student. Years later, this problem persists not just in campus systems, but in many systems we use every day. So, with these examples of algorithmic injustice and of neglecting vulnerable people, Let's add some more. Covert nudging, pushing people to decisions they are not aware they're making. Everything from accepting cookie tracking to buying tickets based on information designed to stress you out, to seeing only content in social media that is guaranteed to make you react emotionally. Naive exclusion refers to how people are by design, often unable to use products because they're not valued as important enough, or unawareness is rampant. So when the social media platform Twitter increased their character count from 140 to 280 characters, they forgot to do the same for the visually impaired users. Naive recklessness alludes to the practice of carelessly sharing data with third parties, such as the dating platform Grindr did with their users' HIV data. Unmanaged conflict allows people to continue harming, harassing, and threatening on platforms that you own and or control. Something that goes on even on mandated corporate Slack channels. So when we hear about technology where people are harmed, the stories often have something in common. It's often those with that disregarded voice and who are discriminated. People already served badly by society who are the most vulnerable. People who are already favored by society often have a good relationship with technology and can see and appreciate how it improves their everyday life and well-being. And what's become clear in my research on ethics and design when trying to understand why people are harmed again and again and again is that methods and processes keep revealing themselves as a contributing factor. Because nothing in our processes is systematically taking into account and mitigating negative impact on vulnerable human beings. In recent years, concepts such as Agile and Lean have become commonplace for organizations and companies. Incremental and iterative development methods all over the workplace. These methods contribute to value creation through frequent feedback loops involving the buyers of products and services. And this increases the probability of making something they are happy with. And in a frequently used illustration of an agile process created by the Swede, Henrik Kniberg, the first item built is a skateboard. And this is shown and tested with target groups. And in the next iteration or development cycle, it becomes a scooter or kick bike. And the circular feedback then leads to the development of a bicycle, a motorcycle, and finally a car. But the point is that you did not beforehand understand that you were building a car. The iterative process brought you there. So I'm a believer in the usefulness of agile methodologies as a more resource-efficient way of working out and solving the problems of a target group. But they do not prevent solutions that also contribute to congestion, accidents, pollution, exhaust fumes, or other ways of endangering people. Because even if we keep getting better at building things the right way and can reach further and affect more people, we have yet to widely adopt the methods that allow us to build the right thing, which involves actively working towards minimizing negative impact. To exemplify, I often show this famous Australian image that illustrates how much road space is taken up by 69 people in a bus, on bicycles, and finally in cars. And the cars, despite there not being one car per person, by far require the most space. And the most innovative companies are praised when they respond with the launch of electric cars and autonomous cars. These vehicles, of course, take up exactly the same amount of road space as fossil-fueled cars. Worryingly, there is also no indication that they lower the number of cars on the road. Money controls the direction of innovation, and impact on well-being is rarely gauged as a success factor. To emphasize my point about who's harmed, and while we're on the topic of transportation, I frequently snap pictures of electric scooters on my walks around Stockholm. And while it may seem that one of these scooters, the one lying down, is a greater obstacle than the other one parked on the sidewalk, this interpretation is of course one based in privilege. The truth is, of course, that both these scooters represent an equally troublesome obstacle for people who are visually impaired or use a wheelchair. People with these temporary or permanent disabilities need to find a safe way to navigate around the scooter to continue their journey. And when you move around a big city with this realization, it becomes devastatingly obvious how the onslaught of electric scooters are creating an everyday randomized and often dangerous obstacle course for vulnerable people who have previously found comfort in using the same obstacle-free and safe path for decades. For example, hostile architecture is something that many can discover in their everyday lives. This is when we see spikes on the ledges that could otherwise be used for seating, or more subtly, armrests in the middle of benches so they are not suitable for lying down on. Eventually, this design also becomes completely invisible by normalization or by design. And in this example, a solar charger for mobile devices has been installed on a park bench. And the solar charger is mounted in the middle of the bench, and the component rises well above the seating area. Again, we have the design of a bench, impossible to lie down on if you have that temporary need. So some people are completely excluded in an invisible way, and thus erased from our consciousness. They themselves already have too weak of a voice to be heard in protest, and because the hostility is not all apparent and it's often invisible, and the majority actually benefit from the solution, there are ever fewer people who protest on their behalf. In our everyday life, this plays out with people who don't get invited to parties when they don't have the right social media account, people who struggle to apply for jobs in digital platforms, people who can't pay for parking, or parents who have difficulty retrieving important information about their children from complicated school platforms. And the thing is, often these same people had no trouble with the same tasks in their pre-digital versions. Technology made them less. In what is popularly called the double diamond, the process diagram illustrates how we put effort into understanding a problem and the related human needs broadly. But as time moves on, we need to decide what needs are prioritized. And that's when we methodologically choose to focus on the needs that most people have, what many people have in common. Those are the clearest patterns. And the result is that people in the outskirts of the research and in the outskirts of what can be described as general needs quite simply aren't allowed any consideration in the design process or in the design solution. There's even a term in the industry for this, edge case. If you are an edge case, you are not a person whose need is a priority. If we built with people's well-being in focus from the start, accessibility for people with disabilities would never be something that came into consideration later in a project as an add-on. An edge case would be assessed on the basis of the harm we incur a human being, not based on how rare the event is. But today, most designs prioritize the needs of those already favored by society, who fit in and are normalized, and who benefit doubly because precisely their needs end up in the spotlight again. In order to be able to work ethically, in the sense that we avoid building that which causes harm, human well-being must be a part of decision-making. We must put effort into documenting, measuring, and imagining how people suffer harm, and include those who suffer from it. This information allows us to express clear motives in decision-making. It allows us to make visible the people who are otherwise not seen or heard. It allows us to prioritize choices in technological development and also understand when we should walk back a decision after understanding the consequences. When do we cancel? And we create traceability, documentation for ethical choices and considerations. And we'll never be able to predict everything. That's not the point. But today, when our methods don't even encourage us to talk about it, negative impact is almost guaranteed. We can always improve our understanding of who is harmed the most. And we can always improve our thinking about what impact we ourselves wish to contribute to. The other day on Twitter, Andrew Seward told us about this story. He'd gone for a run the same morning and a woman ran past him. And despite only passing, she was tagged in his Strava app, a fitness app. And clicking on her picture brought up her full name, her photograph, and a map of her running route, which effectively shows where she lives. And this is default behavior in the app. Now, we don't have to be rocket scientists to conclude that the fitness app contributes to potentially harmful situations and risks that can be avoided by implementing risk assessment into design and development workflows. So impact mapping is a form of risk analysis concerned with anyone who is affected and what happens to them. So each impact, what happens to who, is then estimated according to 4 factors. Number 1 is how severe is this impact? Are we talking embarrassment or life and death? And number 2 is how much do we contribute? That's to say, if we had not done anything, would this impact even exist? So the more we contribute, the more it is our responsibility to minimize the negative impact. Number 3 is how neglected or vulnerable are those affected? And if those affected already have a weak voice in society, it's even more important to help them strengthen their voices. If we only keep building for those who are privileged, gaps only increase. And number 4 is how likely is this to happen? And the higher the probability of the what happening in combination with the other factors, the more important it is to take action. And every assessment is done in a group setting, and these factors are estimated together and updated as we learn more over time. Best case, of course, people with first-hand experience of similar effects are brought in to contribute. The strength of this tool is helping product development teams prioritize not only based on financial outcomes and conversion, but also on the basis of who is harmed and how much. The inclusive panda is helpful for an organization wanting to map all the people who can be affected by a digital solution. So the circle in the middle, the muzzle or snout, encompasses all those we have in mind as our target audience, those we consciously and actively build for. The ear to the left represents the excluded people. This may be people who would benefit from the solution, but no energy is put into building in a way that accommodates their access needs. This could also be people who are not at all favored by the solution, but rather directly disadvantaged by it, as in the case of the electric scooters. The ear to the right represents the unwanted. We don't want these people to use the solution, either because they can harm themselves or because they can damage things for other people. The simplest example would be that some solutions for adults should exclude children, and some solutions for children should exclude adults. And the ears overlap with the head to illustrate that there are likely people in both the excluded and unwanted groups who manage to start using all our parts of a solution anyway. So they can come in and start using it, which puts other people at risk or puts themselves at risk because that is happening invisibly. And this allows us to finish on the nose, the segment of those people we build for who are harmed despite our efforts. So either they are harmed by the behavior of unwanted users, or you fail to understand their needs and vulnerabilities. Dating apps showing distances to the nearest online users is a good example. So when you regularly map participants and non-participants using the inclusive panda, you begin to understand the effects on many more people beyond your expected audience. You gain important insights about how your product or service is bigger than the people you are directing your efforts at. Have a look at how companies like the music streaming platform Spotify are proactively mapping their impact. They're adding actually more specific variables into their impact mapping, like financial insecurity, sleep deprivation, and violence. Also take note on how UNICEF are making careful considerations on use of biometric data. They've made a booklet about that, faces, fingerprints, and feet. And also notice how lawmakers are coming down strong on the misuse of new technology. They're being prompted to pull an emergency brake before allowing specific practices within face recognition, in this example, to continue without a strategy to protect the vulnerable. But remember, ethics in design is not about being afraid of or hindering new technology. It's about helping to influence the direction of technology through reasoned and considered decision making. Ethics can feel like slowing down, but the ability to slow down often means we reach our desired destination faster, especially when we are on rough, uncharted roads. In the end, all companies will be outperformed by a more ethical version catering to the same needs. You can decide to become that company today. At the URL hello.axbom.com/cxcon, you will find my slides and related links. Thank you for your attention.